July 19th, 2004. Salt Lake City, Utah. It was the kind of morning where the heat rises early off the pavement, suffocating the city before the sun is even fully up. At 10:49 a.m., a call comes into the police station that shatters the summer calm. A man named Mark Hacking is on the line. He is breathless, terrified. He tells the dispatcher that he went for his morning jog, a routine run through Memory Grove Park, and when he returned home, the house was too quiet. His wife, Lori, was gone. Within hours, the city of Salt Lake stopped breathing. The community didn't just want to find Lori, they needed to find her. Because Mark and Lori Hacking weren't just any couple. They were the gold standard. Mark was the 28-year-old son of a pediatrician, a devout Mormon, and a man on the verge of greatness. He was days away from moving his family to North Carolina to start medical school. He was the perfect husband. Lori was his beautiful, intelligent anchor. She was a stockbroker's assistant, deeply loved by her family, and 5 weeks pregnant with their first child. They were young, they were faithful, and they were the American dream personified. The police, the neighbors, and the media saw a grieving husband terrified for his pregnant wife. They saw a future doctor whose life was being ripped apart by a random tragedy. But they were looking at a mirage. Because there was no medical school. There was no acceptance letter. There was no move to North Carolina. For 3 years, Mark Hacking hadn't been studying. He had been waking up, packing his books, and driving to a library or a hotel parking lot to play video games, waiting out the clock of a life that didn't exist. The police were searching for a missing woman, but they should have been searching for a motive. Because on the night Lori finally looked behind the curtain, the American dream didn't just end. It was executed.
Welcome to Nightmare Crimes, where every story blurs the line between fact and fear. Some say they're true, others hope they're not. You don't decide, you do. Subscribe and step into the unknown.
To understand the horror of what happened in that apartment, you first have to understand the height from which they fell. Lori Soares was the kind of woman who seemed to have the roadmap of her life drawn in permanent ink. She was striking, with dark, intelligent eyes and a smile that could command a room. She came from a prominent family in California. She was organized, she was driven, and she had a steel backbone. Friends described her as the catch of the county. Mark Hacking was different. He was the class clown, the guy who would do anything for a laugh. He wasn't the top of the class, and he wasn't the captain of the football team, but he had a charm that was disarming. He was gentle. He was safe. They met in a way that feels almost cinematic, on a hung jury in Utah. Locked in a room together, debating a case, Lori saw something in Mark that she needed. Where she was intense, he was relaxed. Where she was ambitious, he was supportive. He seemed like the perfect balance to her drive. They married in August of 1999 in the Bountiful Utah Temple. In their community, a temple marriage is the seal of a righteous life. It tells the world, we are starting this right. By 2004, the script was playing out perfectly. Lori was climbing the ladder at work, respected by her colleagues. And Mark? Mark was the golden boy. He was working graveyard shifts at a psychiatric hospital, seemingly grinding his way toward a medical career. To the outside world, they were a power couple in the making. Lori was the rock, and Mark was the star. But in reality, Lori was the only one standing on solid ground. Mark was already free falling, and he was grabbing onto anything he could to slow the descent. There is a specific kind of pressure that exists in high-achieving, religious communities. It isn't just about making money. It's about worthiness. Mark's father was a beloved pediatrician. His brothers were successful. In the Hacking family, excellence wasn't a goal, it was the baseline. Mark felt the weight of that baseline every single day, but he didn't have the grades to carry it. Years earlier, he had enrolled at the University of Utah. He struggled. He failed classes. Eventually, the university asked him to leave. But Mark couldn't bring himself to say the words, I failed. So he didn't. Instead, he told Lori, his family, and his friends that he had transferred to UCLA. He told them he was commuting or taking classes remotely. It was a small lie, a bandage over a wound. But the wound didn't heal, it got infected. The lie grew limbs. When the time came for graduation from UCLA, Mark didn't come clean. He told everyone he had graduated with honors. Then, he raised the stakes. He announced he had been accepted into medical school at the University of North Carolina, a prestigious program that only takes the best. This wasn't just a sentence spoken at a dinner party. This became his reality. Think about the energy required to maintain this. Mark bought the textbooks for classes he wasn't taking. He would highlight pages in books he didn't understand, just in case Lori opened them. He would leave the apartment for 8 to 10 hours a day, driving to libraries, parking lots, or hotels, sitting in his car, staring at the ceiling, just to simulate a study session. He was working a full-time job of deception. By July of 2004, the lie had reached a terminal velocity. The move to North Carolina wasn't a vague plan anymore. It was happening. Lori had quit her job. She had said her tearful goodbyes to her coworkers. They had given up their apartment lease. They had started packing boxes. Picture the scene inside their apartment just days before the murder. Their living room is stacked high with cardboard boxes. Each box is labeled kitchen, bedroom, Mark's medical books. Lori is taping up these boxes, excited for their new life. She is packing for a future that does not exist. And then, there was the farewell party. Friends and family gathered to celebrate Mark's achievement. They patted him on the back. They gave him gifts, stethoscopes, scrubs, money for the move. They toasted to the future doctor hacking. Mark stood there, smiling, holding a glass, accepting their praise. Imagine the noise in his head in that moment. Every cheer was a countdown. Every "good luck in North Carolina" was a tightening of the noose. He knew that once they got in that moving truck, there was nowhere to go. The road ended. The pressure was no longer just heavy. It was lethal. And Mark hacking was running out of time. Most people think of a lie as a shield, something you hold up to protect yourself in a moment of panic. But for Mark hacking, the lie wasn't a shield. It was a habitat. He lived inside it. To understand how he wasn't caught for 3 years, you have to look at the sheer logistics of his deception. It was a masterpiece of schedule management. Mark worked the graveyard shift as an orderly at the psychiatric hospital. He would come home in the morning, exhausted, just as Lori was waking up. They would have breakfast. He would kiss her goodbye. And then, instead of going to bed, he would grab his backpack and leave again for school. But there was no school. So, where does a man go when he has nowhere to be? He went to the void. For hours, Mark would sit in his car in hotel parking lots. He would sleep in the back seat, catching up on the rest he missed from the night shift. When he wasn't sleeping, he was wandering the aisles of the University of Utah library, not as a student, but as a ghost. He played video games on his laptop. He memorized the campus layout so he could drop specific details into conversations with Lori later that night. "I had a tough exam in the bio lab," he'd say. "I grabbed lunch at the Union Building." It was a performance that required constant improvisation. When his parents asked how his grades were, he didn't just say good. He forged a computer screen printout of a report card with straight A's. When Lori asked about his tuition, he intercepted the mail so she wouldn't see that no bills were coming from the university. There were close calls, terrifying ones. Once, Lori visited the campus to surprise him for lunch. She walked the halls, looking for him. Mark, spotting her from a distance or getting a heads-up text, had to scramble, hiding in bathrooms or ducking into empty lecture halls to avoid being seen not belonging there. Psychologists often talk about the imposter syndrome, where successful people feel like frauds. Mark was living the inverse, the fraud syndrome. He was a failure feeling the exhaustion of success. He was working harder to fake a medical degree than it would have taken to actually earn a regular one. But the deeper he went, the harder it was to turn back. He had created a reality where he was special. In the lie, he was worthy of Lori. In the lie, his father was proud of him. And Mark hacking was willing to endure hours of boredom, isolation, and terror every single day, just to keep living in that reflection. Every house of cards has a fatal flaw: gravity. Eventually, something shifts. For Mark hacking, The shift happened on Friday, July 16, 2004. 3 days before the murder. The couple was packing. The stress was high. Lori, being the organized planner she was, wanted to make sure everything was set for their arrival in North Carolina. She decided to call the University of North Carolina's medical school directly to confirm Mark's financial aid and housing arrangements. She picked up the phone. She dialed the number. On the other end of the line, an administrator pulled up the database. Lori gave them Mark's name, Mark's social security number. There was a pause, the kind of pause that makes your stomach drop. The administrator told her, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hacking. We have no record of a Mark Hacking. He isn't enrolled here. He never applied here." Lori hung up. She was confused, but not yet convinced. Maybe it was a clerical error? Maybe the system was down? She needed to verify the foundation. If he wasn't in the new school, had he really graduated from the old one? She called the University of Utah. She asked for verification of Mark's graduation. The registrar checked the records. Again, the silence. Again, the truth. Mark Hacking was a student here, but he dropped out 3 years ago. He never graduated. In the span of 20 minutes, the last 3 years of Lori's life were revealed to be a fiction. The degree, the honors, the move, the future, all of it was smoke. Lori didn't just sit on this information. She went into prosecutor mode. She called the administration at the medical school back and put them on a conference call. Then, she patched Mark in. Imagine receiving that call. Mark is at the hospital, wearing his scrubs. He answers the phone, expecting a quick check-in. Instead, he hears his wife's voice, cold and shaking, and the voice of the school administrator. "Mark," Lori said, "they say you aren't enrolled." This was the moment. The exit ramp. He could have confessed. He could have said, "I'm sorry. I failed. I lied." It would have been a divorce. It would have been a scandal. But they would have lived. But Mark didn't take the exit ramp. He doubled down. He told Lori it was a computer glitch. He told her the school had lost his file because of a server crash. He lied to her while the truth was on the other line. Lori hung up. She didn't believe him. She sent a note to her supervisors at work that afternoon. It was professional, but looking back, it reads like a frantic signal from a sinking ship. It said, "I have discovered some things today that are very disturbing. I need to leave early." She went home to wait for him. The golden illusion was dead. Now, she was just waiting for the man who killed it. When Lori Hacking walked through the door of their apartment on Friday evening, the air inside must have felt heavy enough to choke on. She had left work early, trembling with the knowledge that her husband was a stranger. She didn't scream. Lori wasn't the type to lose control. She was a planner, and she was trying to calculate the magnitude of the wreckage. For the next 48 hours, the apartment at 127 South Lincoln Street became a pressure cooker. We don't have a recording of exactly what was said, but we know the shape of the argument based on what Mark later whispered to his brothers. Lori demanded the truth. Mark gave her more fog. He told her, again, that it was a computer error. He looked his pregnant wife in the eye and swore that he had fixed it. He told her that the administration had found his files, that everything was back on track for the move to North Carolina. He begged her to just wait until Monday morning when the offices opened so he could prove it. It was a desperate, pathetic stall tactic. He was buying time with currency he didn't have. Saturday passed in a blur of tension. They went shopping for a new mattress, a mundane errand that would later become a grim piece of evidence. But the mood was fractured. Lori was weeping intermittently. She wrote a letter to her friend, saying, "I don't know who I'm married to." By Sunday night, July 18th, Lori had reached a breaking point. She told Mark that it didn't matter what he said anymore. She was going to make phone calls on Monday morning. She was going to uncover every stone. She looked at him and said, "I need to know the truth, Mark, or I can't do this." At around 10 p.m., exhausted from the emotional toll, Lori went to bed. She curled up on the mattress, the old one they were about to replace, and fell into a restless sleep. She likely believed that the worst was over. She thought the confrontation was the climax of the nightmare. She didn't know that the nightmare hadn't even started. While Lori slept, Mark Hacking stayed awake. He didn't pace. He didn't pack a bag and run. He sat in the living room and turned on his Nintendo 64. He played GoldenEye for an hour. Psychologists would later debate what was happening in his brain during those 60 minutes. Was he dissociating? Was he saying goodbye to his childhood? Or was he simply waiting for the street noise outside to die down? Sometime after midnight, the decision crystallized. He realized that Monday morning was coming. The sun would rise. Lori would wake up. She would make those calls, and the great Mark Hacking would be exposed as a fraud. He would lose his status. He would lose his father's respect. He would be nothing. In his mind, there was only one way to stop Monday from coming. Mark stood up. He walked to the closet and retrieved a .22 caliber rifle. It was a small weapon, quiet. He walked into the bedroom. He stood over Lori. She was sleeping on her side. He aimed the rifle at her head, and he fired 3 times. The shots were not loud enough to wake the neighbors. Lori never woke up. The problem, Lori, the baby, the expectations, the truth, was gone. What happened next is what separates a crime of passion from the work of a monster. Mark didn't call 911. He didn't try to revive her. He went into logistics mode. He wrapped Lori's body in the sheets. He dragged her off the bed. Because he had shot her in the head, the mattress was soaked in blood. He knew he couldn't hide a blood-soaked mattress. So he cut the pillow top off the mattress with a knife. He rolled Lori's body inside the mattress material like a carpet. He carried her out to the dumpster in the alley behind the church next door. He threw his pregnant wife into the garbage. Then he went back inside and cleaned. But he had a problem. The bed was destroyed. If anyone saw the bed, they would know. So, at the crack of dawn, Mark Hacking did the unthinkable. He got in his car, drove to a furniture store the moment it opened, and bought a new mattress. He strapped it to his car, drove home, and set up the new bed in the room where he had just executed his wife. He made the bed. He smoothed the sheets. And then, he put on his running shoes. He tied the laces. And he ran to the park to perform the final act of his play. He caught his breath, dialed 911, and summoned the tears. "My wife is missing," he said. The performance had begun. On Monday morning, Salt Lake City woke up to a mission. Lori Hacking was everyone's daughter. She was everyone's sister. Within 24 hours, the search for her became the largest mobilization of volunteers in Utah's history. Thousands of people took off work. They put on walking shoes. They combed the foothills, the parks, and the canyons, shoulder to shoulder, looking for a pregnant woman in a gray jogging suit. And in the center of this hurricane stood Mark. He told the press, "We just want her home. Lori, if you're out there, we love you." But behind the scenes, the perfect husband mask was melting. Mark wasn't sleeping. He wasn't eating. The police were already suspicious, not because of evidence yet, but because his story had a hole in it. He said he ran at Memory Grove Park, but no one saw him. Then, on Monday night, the pressure cooker exploded. Mark Hacking didn't just crack, he shattered. Police received a call about a disturbance at a local motel. When they arrived, they found Mark Hacking running through the hallways, completely naked, screaming incoherently. He was hallucinating. He was babbling. To the public, this looked like a man broken by grief. A husband driven mad by the loss of his wife and unborn child. But the detectives watching him saw something else. They saw a man whose brain could no longer hold the weight of 2 conflicting realities. The doctor and the killer were fighting for control, and the system had crashed. Mark was taken to the psychiatric ward at the University of Utah Hospital, the very same hospital where he had pretended to work for 3 years. The irony was absolute. He finally had a room at the hospital, but he was a patient, not a doctor. While Mark was sedated in a hospital bed, the police went back to the apartment. The grieving husband was out of the way. Now, they could really look. Great crimes are often undone by small pieces of paper. Detectives searching the apartment found a receipt in Mark's wallet. It wasn't for gas or food. It was for a new mattress. The timestamp on the receipt was 10:23 a.m. on the morning Lori went missing. This was the smoking gun. Why would a man whose wife just vanished stop to buy a new bed? Why would he dispose of the old one? Police brought in the luminol. The bedroom lit up like a star map. Despite Mark's cleaning, the blood evidence was everywhere. It was soaked into the bed frame. It was in the carpet fibers. The story of a jogging kidnapping evaporated instantly. But they still didn't have a body. And they didn't have a confession. For that, they needed family. On Saturday, July 24th, 5 days after the murder, Mark's brothers, Scott and Lance Hacking, went to visit him in the psychiatric ward. These were men who loved their brother. They had defended him. They believed in him. They sat by his bed. The room was quiet. Mark was heavily medicated, his eyes groggy. Scott looked at his brother and asked the question that had been haunting them all week. "Mark," he said, "the police found things in the apartment. They found blood. You need to tell us the truth. We can't help you if you don't tell us the truth." Mark looked at them. The energy required to keep the lie alive was gone. He didn't have the strength to invent another story. He leaned forward and whispered, "I did it." The air left the room. His brothers, stunned, asked, "You did what?" "I shot her," Mark said. "I shot her in her sleep." Imagine being Scott and Lance Hacking in that moment. You are holding the hand of your little brother, the boy you grew up with, and he has just told you that he is a monster. They left the room. They walked out into the hospital hallway. And then, they did the hardest thing a brother can do. They didn't protect him. They didn't hire a lawyer to suppress it. They walked straight to the police officers stationed in the lobby. Scott Hacking looked at the detective, tears in his eyes, and said, "He confessed. He told us he killed her." The search was over. The charade was over. The golden boy was in handcuffs. But the nightmare had one final chapter, the landfill. A confession is words. Justice requires evidence. And the evidence of Mark Hacking's crime was buried under 3,000 tons of compacted trash. Mark had told police exactly where to look, but in a landfill, exactly is a relative term. The search for Lori Hacking was a nightmare of engineering. Police officers and volunteers spent 33 days sifting through garbage by hand. They wore hazmat suits, raking through the refuse of the city, rotting food, broken glass, discarded lives, looking for a woman who had been thrown away like she was nothing. It was a grueling, heartbreaking process. It was the final insult to a woman who had been so meticulous, so organized, and so full of life. But they didn't stop. On October 1st, 2004, nearly 3 months after the murder, a searcher found human remains. DNA testing confirmed it was Lori. She was finally found. She could be laid to rest. Mark Hacking was charged with first-degree murder. There would be no circus trial. There would be no defense of insanity. Faced with the mountain of evidence and his own confession, Mark pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 6 years to life in prison. The doctor, the scholar, the perfect husband was given a new title, inmate number 14863. When we look at monsters, we expect to see fangs. We expect to see rage. But Mark Hacking didn't kill Lori because he hated her. By all accounts, he loved her. The problem was, he loved himself more. He killed her because she had become a mirror. When she looked at him that final weekend, she didn't see the medical student anymore. She saw the dropout. She saw the liar. She saw the failure. Mark Hacking decided that it was better to be a grieving widower than a disappointed husband. He decided that murder was easier than admitting he wasn't special. He spent 3 years building a house of cards. And when the wind finally blew, he didn't try to hold it up. He just crushed the person standing inside. This case forces us to ask a terrifying question. How well do we really know the people we sleep next to? Lori Hacking was intelligent and observant. Yet she looked at a stranger every day for 3 years and saw a soulmate. I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Mark Hacking was a cold-blooded sociopath from the beginning? Or do you think the pressure of his own lies drove him to a mental break? And more importantly, what is the biggest red flag in a relationship that you have ever ignored? Let's talk about it down below. If you want to explore the darker side of human nature, make sure you are subscribed to Nightmare Crimes. We are diving into a new story uncovering the lies, the betrayals, and the monsters hiding in plain sight. Until next time, Keep your eyes open.